Hello, and welcome to today's live chapter reading of Scandalously Yours, Titans of Manhattan, number 5, by Anise Storm, presented by Itsy Bitsy Book Bits. Prologue, Alessia. Sleep was evading me once again, and I knew a lot of it had to do with the small life growing inside of my belly. When I signed on to become a surrogate for Anton and Elsa Kingston, I had never expected the roller coaster that pregnancy had been. Initially, I just needed some funding for medical school. It was extremely expensive, and my student loans only covered so much. The amount of money that I'd earned from carrying a child for this couple would pay for the next few years of school. It had all been a whirlwind in the beginning, and Anton's name and influence only made things more difficult. At first, I thought I would be carrying a child for a same sex couple, but I quickly learned that the couple I'd be helping involved a Hollywood heartthrob whose very poster had been hanging on my dorm wall. He was one of the hottest men in Hollywood and had just been announced as this year's face for a very popular magazine's Sexiest Man Alive edition. It made things a bit awkward, so even before I subjected myself to all the fertility tests and procedures, I had removed his pictures. He was much nicer than I thought he'd be, and his wife was the sweetest. I was honestly happy to provide this service for them, or I was, until I realized I was going to have to push this watermelon out of me soon. Labor and delivery scared the bejesus out of me, and I didn't know which part terrified me more. That terror was likely the reason I couldn't get any sleep. Insomnia had plagued me since I was younger, but being unable to easily roll over in bed anymore didn't help either. I let out a sigh, then ran my hand over my hard belly. We already knew the baby was a boy, and unlike most new mothers, I couldn't sit here and pick out names. Anton and Elsa would name their child and take him home, and I'd be relegated to pictures either obtained online or generously provided by them. In the beginning, it didn't seem like a big deal. Now that I had felt him kick and move inside of me, my feelings had shifted. But there was nothing I could do about it. This child wasn't mine, and it never would be. I was simply a womb for their DNA. Maybe one day I will have a child of my own, I murmured to him as I rubbed my hand over where he was nestled. Something clenched in my belly, and I smiled as I thought about this baby responding to me. I ignored the slight cramp and got up. Walking around usually helped when I was as tense as I found myself right now. When I finally got onto my feet, I tried stretching. My back had been dully aching for the last few days, and I had read about that being one of the signs of preterm labor. I was currently living in a small studio apartment, so the bed was mere feet from the kitchen. In the time it took me to walk from point A to point B, the ache began to intensify. One or two of the contractions were intense enough to make me grab onto the counter. There was a definite start and end to them, and luckily, they seemed spaced apart enough to not cause too much anxiety. I made my way to the refrigerator and grabbed a bottled water. After twisting off the top, I took a large swig, then another two or three until the next contraction had me ready to double over. I remembered the breathing classes that Elsa had dragged me to, and while it seemed easy enough in theory to focus on an object and do something so natural when your insides were stretching and spasming, the task wasn't quite as simple. Fuck, I cursed when another soon followed, and I tried to remember what I was told about timing them. The pain was like a fist, squeezing my abdomen. My body grew tight as it paralyzed me. Then a few moments of relief would follow until they started again. I grabbed my water and went to take another sip of the bottle, but the bottle slipped from my hand as another rocked my small body. Tears sprung to my eyes, and I didn't even care that there was now water dripping from the counter onto the floor. I slowly made my way back to the bed where my cell phone was charging on the nightstand beside it. When I got it opened, I hit one of the numbers I had on speed dial. It didn't take long before Elsa's cheery voice came through the line. Alicia? Yeah, I wanted to let you. Oh, I couldn't even get it out. The contractions were coming closer together, and each one was getting longer in duration, too. Are you okay? Is it the baby? She asked, the concern in her voice evident. I'm going into labor, I stammered, then let out a relieved sigh at the moment's peace that followed. Stay calm, she advised, and while I wanted to tell her it wasn't really that easy, I didn't want to worry her. I'm calling an ambulance and we'll meet you at the hospital. The line went dead before I could say anything, and I spent the next several minutes putting on some sweatpants and a t-shirt. 2 weeks earlier, I had packed my hospital bag, and it was right beside the bed. I had just managed to get dressed before there was a knock on the door. Grabbing my bag and phone, I made my way to answer it. The next 20 minutes went by in a blur. My water broke on the way downstairs, which was just my luck. The EMT had assured me that everything was fine. I was embarrassed but chose to take him at his word because the steady contractions left me unable to focus on anything other than the pain. It hadn't taken long to get to Mount Sinai Hospital on Fifth Avenue. Many celebrities gave birth there, so it was no surprise Anton Kingston would choose the same place. Before long, I was settled into one of the birthing rooms. It all seemed so real now. For 9 months, I had deluded myself into thinking this was nothing major, but my contractions were holding steady at 5 minutes apart, with each lasting at least a full minute. Elsa and Anton were on their way. I had gotten her excited text messages as I lay there in bed with an IV in my hand and monitor strapped to my abdomen. I could already imagine how gorgeous this baby would be. Anton was rightfully dubbed the sexiest man alive, and Elsa was such a classic beauty. She seemed to give me those Grace Kelly vibes. I had once mentioned that to her, and she'd seemed surprised I would even know who that was. I had grown up watching vintage movies with my grandparents, especially my grandfather Earl, who would tell me my grandmother, Lonnie, was twice as beautiful as her. Their love story was the type authors wrote about. I used to dream about finding the same thing for myself, but in this day and age, nothing was the same. I shuddered to think how things would be for this baby when he was my age, and it caused me to focus back on him and labor. It was a good thing I did because the proud parents entered the room. Of course, Anton went to talk to the nurse, notating some things on my chart, while Elsa started to fuss over me. Do you need anything? She asked after she fluffed my pillow. I need to have this baby, I told her, smiling weakly. I'm so excited, Alessia. You can't even imagine how much this means to Anton. I We need to do some measurements, the nurse told us, and Elsa stepped back. I tried to focus on her gorgeous face, and seeing her with Anton as they talked excitedly to one another, it was apparent how badly they wanted this baby. From what they had told me during the surrogacy interviews, she had once been pregnant but lost the child to miscarriage. She was then told she would never be able to carry a baby to term, and my heart had broken for her. The couple had been so devastated, and I knew how happy this child would make them. I wanted to heal what was broken inside of others. I had always been that way, as far back as I could remember. When other girls played with Barbie dolls and makeup, I had plastic stethoscopes and would run around the house pretending I was a doctor. It had been all I had ever wanted to be, and I was so close to making that dream come true. In a way, Anton and Elsa were essentially helping me because without the money I earned from this surrogacy, I might have had to drop out of medical school altogether. 9 centimeters. It looks like this little one is ready to come out, the woman happily exclaimed. And I didn't know who wanted that more, me or this baby boy. The contractions continued, and soon they began to blur together. I'd never experienced such intense physical pain in all my life. Do you want an epidural? The nurse asked as she saw my discomfort. I shook my head vehemently. The parents had requested I deliver naturally, if possible, and while it was a strange request, it was one I planned to honor. Elsa seemed relieved when I turned down the drugs, and I almost wish she could feel an ounce of what I did right now, because it would have certainly made her consider changing her mind. Then again, I wouldn't wish this on anyone, especially someone who had been as wonderful to me as she had been. I focused on the breathing, and it wasn't long before I transitioned to active labor. Both Anton and Elsa left the room, and Dr. Allen came in. The woman was aware of our situation, and I suspected that it was why I would catch her looking at me with such sympathy. I didn't want her pity or anyone else's. I simply wanted to fulfill the duties I had signed up for and deliver a healthy child to such a deserving couple. You're doing wonderful, dear, she told me while brushing my sweat dampened hair off my head. I had to look a mess, but if I did, neither her nor the Kingstons let on. It just hurt so much. I managed to get out before I groaned out in pain. She patted my arm, but I could draw no comfort from her because my body was racked with pain. There was an overwhelming pressure, as if she knew what I was experiencing. Dr. Allen told me it was time to start pushing. This was the part that had scared me the most, but I was too far gone to worry about that now. I started to do as she instructed. Each one sent pain rushing to other places, and it wasn't long before her voice broke through the cloudy haze surrounding me. I can see his head. Keep pushing, Alessia. I pushed with all my might, and despite it feeling as if my tailbone was fracturing into pieces, I didn't let up, and soon I screamed out in pain as the last few finished the job. I wasn't sure at first whether I had gone numb from the agony or not until I heard a baby's cry. It's definitely a boy, the nurse exclaimed as I tried to sit up to get a better view of him. I then realized what I was doing and laid back against the pillow. This baby wasn't mine, and by looking at him, it would only make this moment harder. I had just endured the worst pain of my young life, but it was only physical. It would fade with time and good drugs. Meanwhile, the emotional kind I would suffer if I allowed myself any attachment to this child would linger forever. Do you want to hold him? Dr. Allen asked me, and I immediately shook my head. It'll do you some good. We're bringing Anton and Elsa in, so this might be the only chance you will get to say your goodbyes, dear. I didn't know if the tears in my eyes were residual from the delivery or new from the other type of pain I knew it would follow. I had never imagined keeping this child, but once he was laid in my arms and I looked down into his face, something washed over me that I wasn't able to describe and that I didn't expect. Sadness, joy, regret. I forced myself to smile as he cooed. He had a head full of dark hair and the bluest eyes I had ever seen. You're such a perfect meshing of your mother and father, little one. You're going to have such an amazing life with them. Voices in the doorway made me pause, and when I looked in that direction, I could see the proud parents. This moment had been one I'd been dreading, but the sooner it happened, the easier it would be for all of us. I held him up as Elsa got closer. Soon, she was cradling her son in her arms while Anton stood over them and began counting the 10 perfect fingers and toes. The doctor came back over to me, and it wasn't long before I was whisked away to the private room that had already been prepared. I knew the baby would need to stay in the hospital overnight for observation, but after that, the two of them could take him home. I was in one of the highly sought after private rooms, and I shook my head when the new nurse advised that it was because of its proximity to Central Park. I loved the park and often jogged there multiple times a week before I had gotten pregnant. I almost wanted to get up and see it for myself, but I didn't have a high tolerance for pain, and my body still ached in places I didn't even know it could. Is there anything we can get for you? Dr. Allen asked me. Maybe something for the pain so I can rest. I haven't gotten much sleep in days, although I knew my dreams would be haunted by a tiny little infant I'd never see or feel inside of me again. More tears added to the ones already streaking down my cheeks, so I closed my eyes, something was placed in my IV, and after declining visitors, I finally drifted off to sleep. Once I woke up, my life would be indelibly changed forever, and only time would tell whether that change would be a good one or a bad one. 6 years later, Bahamas. Although the sun had recently set, there was still a Caribbean breeze coming off the nearby ocean. I was in the Bahamas at a tropical paradise, the exotic setting making me forget all about the fact that I was only there for work. Having recently finished my last residency, I'd accomplished the one dream I had ever had. So I decided to treat this professional retreat like a vacation as well. With the long hours I would soon be working at New York Presbyterian, I thought I might not get the chance to visit this place as beautiful as this for some time. The days were filled with various medical conferences, so many that it honestly had my head spinning. I'd learn a little about so many things, but not a lot about anything in particular. With the panels shut down for the night, I had time to walk along the shoreline and prepare myself for tomorrow's grueling schedule. As soon as my feet hit the sand, I decided to worry about them when the time arrived. For now, I wanted to be one with nature. I bent down and removed my flip flops and let my toes sink into the warm, white sand beneath my feet. I was wearing a pair of bright yellow boardwalk pants and a striped t shirt I'd knotted at the bottom off to the side. My long dark hair was pinned up in a ponytail, but it didn't stop a few errant strands from coming loose and those soft tendrils being moved gently by the breeze. The island was a private one outside of the massive resort situated on the north end of it. The property was owned by Cortland Hospitality Group, which was a brand that epitomized luxury. I had looked up the hotel before I booked the trip because I'd wanted to know what amenities it had. I'd come away impressed, not because it had a lot of activities, but because it highlighted the true beauty of the island. As gorgeous and vibrant as it was during the day, it was almost ethereal at night. I'd only been here for two of them, but both were spent a lot like tonight. I walked along the shoreline, my hand with the flip-flop swinging lightly in the breeze. You shouldn't be out here alone this time of night, a voice said, breaking into my thoughts. I spun around to see where it came from and who it belonged to. My breath hitched in my throat when a sliver of moonlight fell between us and illuminated the space. The man was physically imposing. his height alone causing him to tower somewhat over me. He was also shirtless, and no matter how hard I tried to look elsewhere, I was foolishly gawking at him. I didn't get out very often, so it wasn't every day I ran into someone so attractive. As my eyes remained glued to his hard chest, I did notice what looked like dark stars, which began under his arm before trailing lower. My eyes followed them, each one getting larger until I was now staring at the waistband of his swim trunks. I briefly wondered whether they continued lower, and that was when I shook my head to clear those impure thoughts. What makes you think I'm alone? I asked, then inwardly winced when he responded. I don't see anyone else out here. Are you waiting on someone? His voice was deep, the husky baritone making me somewhat shiver. No, but I could have been. True, he responded as his gaze slid slowly down my body, heating my skin. But since you're not waiting for someone, I go back to what I first said. My eyes flickered up to his, and I could see amusement on his face. Damn, this man was hot. He was for sure a better sight than many men I had met on the island. The resort had been rented out specifically for this convention, which meant he had to be involved with medicine in some way. Finally, I exhaled, then smiled brightly. Duly noted. I just wanted some air. I was about to leave, but then a thought struck me. I looked up at him. Would you like to walk along the shore with me? He only took a few seconds to answer. How could I turn down an offer like that? His smile made me somewhat wary, but I didn't feel any sort of fear with him. I was honestly glad just to have someone to talk to, even if it was fleeting. Great, I think I want to head north. There's a small stretch of beach, fully encased by palms. It then struck me that he might think I had ulterior motives with that location. So I quickly added, I noticed it earlier, and there were a few logs that might make a good bench. Ah, he replied, I know exactly which place you're talking about, but it's this way. He told me as he pointed behind me. It's a good thing I came along when I did before you got yourself lost. His tone had changed, but I couldn't really describe it. It wasn't a bad sort of thing, but I got the impression that when this man spoke, others listened. I would likely be no exception, but wanting to just enjoy some companionship, I didn't read too much into his tone and focused on the words instead. Since I did have occasional problems with misdirection, I turned around. We began to walk, and he kept his pace light with me. Even once or twice overstepping mine with his long strides, the moonlight seemed to follow us. I hadn't had a date in months, and while this was just a walk with a stranger, it was more company than I'd had in some time. Dating for me was hard because I'd been extremely busy with medical school, then residencies, and most relationships tended to fizzle out quickly when I mentioned my past. I obviously couldn't tell anyone who I'd been a surrogate for, only that I had been one, and it seemed to turn many men off. It had never really bothered me much until I had gotten here. This island was paradise, and the type of place where romantic lovers flew off to for weekend getaways and vacations. Me? I could only come to a place like this for work because I had no significant other, and if the past was any indication, I doubted that would change anytime soon. I looked over at the man and realized that there was an awkward sort of silence between us. My name's Alessia. What's yours? I asked as I tried to break the ice. Chris, he responded. Are you a nurse? A nurse? I repeated and shook my head. No, I actually just finished my residency and will be practicing at New York Presbyterian. Really? He replied. I've recently started practicing there myself. What a coincidence. It seemed almost too good to be true. Not that seeing someone this unnerving every day would be so great, it also wouldn't be bad. Maybe we'll run into each other there sometime. He grabbed my swinging hand and placed it in his so naturally. I'd like that. I genuinely smiled as we continued to walk. I wished I'd had more things to talk to him about, but medicine had been my focus since high school. Thinking about the place where I'd soon begin my career, I decided to bring up the hospital for no other reason than to have a conversation topic. Since I hadn't technically started there yet, I decided to mention the only thing I had been warned about. Me too. However, I heard the chief of staff is a real dick. He responded, seeming genuinely surprised. I mean, I haven't met him or anything, but it's just what I've heard. I then took my free hand and used it to tuck the loose tendrils back behind my ear. Have you met him? Met him, Chris said, then chuckled. He stopped suddenly, and I hadn't anticipated it, so I ran right into him. Large hands reached out to steady me, which kept me from falling to the sandy earth below. You wouldn't be talking about Chief Kristopher Simon, would you? I tried to think back to the group of men I had heard gossiping earlier that day. Yes, that's him. Why? Do you know him? He slipped his hand under my chin, then tipped it upward. You're staring at him. I gasped, then saw the way the corner of his lip quirked upward. No way. He then released me and pulled something from his back pocket. When I saw him produce a wallet, a frisson of fear did rush through me. I already knew that what he was going to show me before he opened it and held it up for me. Kristopher Simon, I murmured as I read the name on his license. And I'm sorry, this walk has just taken a turn for the worst. He was smirking and didn't seem upset at all, which made me feel a sense of relief. On the contrary, I think you're delightful. Well, as much as a dick could think that you are. I really wanted the earth to open and swallow me whole, but since it wasn't going to, I smiled back at him. In my defense, I hadn't even started there yet, so I was simply going off of hearsay. And now that we've been introduced, is your opinion changing? I let out a small giggle. Right now, you seem to be quite the gentleman. They say first impressions are everything, and I'm just sorry I haven't made a better one on you. As I've just said, he interrupted, I find you quite delightful. The clearing you're looking for is right up ahead, so let's take a seat. We can talk and get to know one another better. Who knows? You might agree with the others after a few more minutes with me.